Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries RPG podcast, and this is the second episode where I'm talking with Johannes Paavola about how we're going to adapt the Scum Villainy downtime system to work with the second season of our Midderlands game, which we're using the ICRPG roleplay system for. Because I'm a big fan of like players rolling for things, I like the idea of just sort of like being able to say to the players like, "Oh, you need to get 18 or above on a D20 or whatever." And just like pick which of you wants to roll it, have a player roll it. Absolutely fine. And also, one of the reasons I like some things like this is because it's not then just me as the GM randomly deciding, "Oh, well, this faction's annoyed with you for X, Y, and Z. They're going to do something." It's a result of your actions, but it's also as a result of chance as well, which I think also adds like a bit more sort of verisimilitude to it, because obviously no one in the world can like predict their actions in like real life and all the consequences they have. So I like it in a game where you, like, say you do something which might be innocuous, or you think, oh well, yeah, okay, there's going to be no real comeback from that, but there's always that little small chance that there might be.
Yeah, and it's part of the bit where you also get to be surprised because you're running the game and you didn't know that what we did was going to piss these guys off. Yeah. But that's the way it went, and now you have new stuff that you didn't think about.
Yeah, it keeps it interesting for me as the GM. And also, to use our example of like the work experience nephew, because why not? I love the ludicrous examples. If you're doing this as part of a discussion and we're like, all right, so that guy you annoyed, like somehow that's degraded your relationship with the guild, you can then like chat with the players and be like, oh, well, why is that? What's going on with this like young guy who seemed fairly innocuous in the session? So suddenly you've not only generated like potential future conflict and content, you've also got an NPC there who might have just been like a young guy who was like, oh my god, don't burn my barge, and suddenly he's become like a lot more than that because of the content that's been generated.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's one of the big things about this kind of thing, where the game helps you in a way to generate stuff that keeps the load lighter on you. Of course, we're both. I would venture to say we are connoisseurs of the random table, and that's also like it's a facet of the same thing, right? It's having tools to help you do the job, because you could determine that this is the work experience nephew, you have this idea, but you didn't have to come up with that. The game helped you, and I think things like this will be great to include, I think, in our...
It's the same reason why we've run a few published adventures as part of like the first season. It's one of the reasons why I like adventures like the Weird That Befell Drigg Bolton, where they have like, that's got 4 random encounter tables in it, because obviously as things go on with the fallen star that's arrived, things start getting weirder as it exerts more influence, and it's got like a day and a night chart, like mundane for like when stuff is normal, and then which is just like, oh, you meet some peasants and they're like getting the crops in, or
there's like praise Gale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's like oh at night you meet like a hunter coming home from like trapping or whatever, all fairly like mundane stuff. And then at a certain point, you switch over to using like the weird encounter charts from like day and night, where you start seeing like phantoms like drifting across the moors, or you come across mutated animals.
Yeah, the goats just walking around.
Yeah, and that was a random roll on that. It's just like, oh, you come across some mutated animals, and there's a little table for mutated animals, and I was like, oh, right, okay, talking animals. All right, okay, and just so I looked on the chart where you were going, there's like a big like goat pen. And I was like, all right, yeah, I'll just say it's those goats and they can talk. And we had that whole random scene. And that was not planned in the adventure or planned by myself, but it was like an interesting sort of little diversion, a little side scene that went on. And I think it's those sort of like interesting, odd little things that happen that tend to be what sort of stick in people's minds after an adventure. Because obviously you have like the big sort of climax of an adventure and you're like, oh yeah, we defeated the evil lord and whatever, da-da-da-da. But then you're like, oh yeah, but what about those like weird like talking goats? Like we met like halfway through, or like you guys referenced several times last time. You referenced like the flying books in like the Stygian library, and that was just one like little random encounter that we did
Yeah.
sessions and sessions before.
Yeah.
But because it's a bit odd, it's a bit random, it's a bit off the wall, it sticks in people's minds.
Yeah. That's the one that I will remember, I think. Like one of the most clear memories that I have of the first season is that exact thing where I didn't really do much because I got knocked out almost immediately by a flying book. But I got to watch the thing unfold. And then, of course, afterwards we read the genealogy book, which that turned into a whole thing as well. And random again.
And again, yeah, because there's the Stygian Library adventure. When you obviously it's an interdimensional library, so there's books everywhere. There is just like a big table of like random books you can find, and there are things like the genealogy tome, and it's like it contains a complete history of like all the kings and queens and all of that, and you just run with whatever you get. The players go, I'm grabbing a random book. You're like, okay, you found a manual of the planes that tells you about all the different planes and whatever, and you just run with whatever the players find, which I find both enjoyable and challenging as a GM, because you do have to think on your feet. You have to think, right, okay, so they've got this manual of the planes, right? Okay, so I've got to fold that into whatever I'm doing and give them enough information to convey what's in that book without obviously pausing the game for half an hour and describing all the planes and stuff like that. So I think in terms of using these, and I'm sure we'll come back to that subject again at some point in the future, in terms of using the sort of Scum and Villainy system, in terms of like steps I need to take to adapt it to use for the Midderlands, I would say probably the first thing is like create a list of factions.
List all the factions out. I'm just going to quickly count how many there are in Scum and Villainy. So 46 in Scum and Villainy. Of course, you don't need all that much. And the fewer you have, obviously, the more intensely their like interactions will develop, because it's going to be the same actors every time. So a list of factions.
Yeah, and also then needs to include the faction goals.
Yeah. And depending on if you want to have some sort of measure of scale for these factions, you could note, as you are aware, that each of these factions has a tier in Scum and Villainy. So you might note down just a number from 1 to 4 or 5, with 5 being probably the royal house, really. For everyone else, probably from 1 to 4, just as a general measure of scale, with 1 being it's a gang on a street gang, and then 4 being I don't know,
probably like your official sort of guilds and stuff.
Yeah, the big the guild
or
that has
the noble houses, like they're not
royal, exactly
houses.
Exactly, or like a really important guild that has a monopoly on a very important thing. But I don't know that exists necessarily in.
I would say potentially the Witch Hunters Guild.
Yeah, probably, because they would have a mandate from.
Yeah, because initially they were part of the church, but they're now like a separate entity, and they've pretty much got the license to like burn whoever they want to as a witch. So
barges.
Because they're literally like they get rubber stamped by like the crown, pretty much.
Yeah. So that's the sort of scale, and then if you ever need to roll for something, you could use that as a measure. Now, because we don't need to bolt this onto ICRPG mechanics, and if we do, we'll have to do some design work on that. But if you wanted to use the Scum and Villainy thing, let's say you have the street gang, and you mark down like their tier 1, you just roll a d6, and 6, they get whatever it is that they're trying to do, or they fend off a thing.
So would you be like adding the tier to that roll? Or?
No, it's just the number of dice you roll.
Oh, right.
In this instance, basically the way that Scum because basically Scum and Villainy says, like, if there's a call for it, just do a fortune roll, which is just take a number of dice equal to the tier, and you roll those, and then you use the sort of resolution mechanic, which for our edification, let's go through that. So 6 is complete success. You do it. You do the thing. 5 to 4 is you do the thing, but there's a consequence of some kind. And 3 to 1 is you didn't do the thing and you get whacked by circumstances. You get like severe consequences. So if you wanted to, you could use that as a resolution thing. Just take a number of dice equal to tier, roll it. 6, they're good. 5 to 4, maybe there's some, and then
I don't have any problems just using those mechanics as is, because, like I say, it's mainly going to be a background thing.
Yeah.
So, from the player's point of view, it doesn't really matter to them if I'm rolling a load of d6 and then using the sort of Scum and Villainy rules to go, oh yeah, the Witch Hunters faction has succeeded in doing whatever.
Yeah, because I would probably just use this as a resolution thing when they're going up against each other. So when the Sewer Guild and the Rivermen's Guild are fighting in the background, and you want to have an idea of how that's going, you take the Rivermen's tier and you take the Sewer tier, you roll them off against each other, you see how the results tally up, and then
presumably whoever gets like the highest.
I would. Yeah, it's basically up to you at that point. Like who gets the most of the highest gets to do what they were trying to do. Basically, that's just a simple roll off with like taking into account if there's a gang and they go up against the Witch Hunters, the gang is going to lose.
Yeah.
But they might not. If the Witch Hunters have a really bad day and they roll all 1s and the gang rolls a 6.
Yeah. Well, which again is something I like with these random things, because most of the time, probability, we can predict the outcome. Like say if like a street gang go up against the Crown, 9 out of 10 they're just going to get obliterated. But there's always that tiny little chance that they might at least scrape through and live to fight another day.
Yeah, or maybe like the victory is, like a lot of them got just destroyed in the street, but one of the, like there was like an important noble who wanted to make a point, leading the knights down the street. They were whacking criminals and whatnot. That guy got bagged. He disappeared. They made him go away in a cellar that no one knows about, and now.
Well, that's it. You have like, I don't know, you're like your street gang, and they're maybe like trying to break into the royal treasury to like steal something.
Yeah.
They get lucky, they succeed, and it's like, oh yeah, loads of them were probably killed breaking in and stuff like that. But maybe like 1 or 2 of them escaped, and they've got the thing that.
Yeah, they got the gold.
Yeah.
So that's what I would use it for, and probably not much else. Basically, just like if they're going up against each other, they're trying to resolve it with like a simple D6 thing.
Because what I quite fancy doing, and this is just because I'm a bit of a sucker for handouts, I quite fancy doing the like the newspaper style handouts, like after each sort of downtime. So like you can have it so like your characters have like got like just a little tiny like news sheet or whatever with like say if the royal treasury is robbed, maybe there's like a story about it in there. It's like, oh yes, 5 of the 6 thieves were killed, but one of them managed to escape with like such and such a noble's like prized gem that was kept in the treasury or whatever.
Or then there's the like a series of hangings is to occur in this square.
That's it. You can have things like, oh, if perhaps if your characters are like tight with this particular street gang and their leader's been captured in something, like say he's going to be hung in the town square, maybe the gang's like, oh look, we need some help, we're going to try and like rescue him from like the hangman's noose. So like tight with you guys, maybe you can like help us out with it. And you can sort of like generate missions and content using that. So
and then you have to determine like which of the 2 terrible options you're trying to do, if you decide to help them at all, is like, do you go and assault the tower where they're keeping this guy, or do you try and take them from the actual news itself in the square? Both of those sound really
like a Robin Hood style thing where they're like fire the arrow,
shoot it. Like do a whole just Pirates of the Caribbean style.
Because I mean, obviously, with as we said when we were talking about ICRPG with the rest of the guys, when we sort of decided to make the switch, it does lean slightly more towards the sort of high octane, like high action sort of end of the spectrum that D&D is at. Whereas previously, we played slightly more sort of old school systems, which are a bit more sort of, I don't want to use the word gritty, but they're a bit more sort of low key.
Yeah, and they're more, I suppose, like tuned down as opposed to tuned up, which is like ICRPG is definitely tuned up because it's about the like heroic action in the fantasy milieu type
It's
deal.
another reason why, because I know Rob, when I said, there's going to be like a 5 year sort of gap between the first season and the second season, and Ian were like, I was surprised the gap's so long. But part of the reason I wanted to do that is because obviously you guys have gone from being like these sort of quite low key. All right, yeah, you got a few levels, so you're getting a bit more powerful, but you've gone from being these quite low key guys to sort of now being like these powerful sort of guys who are like, you've got this detective agency and whatever. Now, I thought with a 5 year gap, it seems a bit more feasible because obviously you guys have come back from the Dolmen Wood. You're like dripping in riches. You've got loads of like loot and stuff while you're out there. You've come back. You've set yourself up. You've established yourself. It also gives like your character. You decided to go more for the sort of magical side of stuff. Like 5 years is like a good time to say, yeah, you've had 5 years. You've been studying, you've been sort of realigning yourself and like retraining yourself. So whereas I think if we'd have done it like a month's passed and you were suddenly like, a month has passed, I am now a wizard, that seems a bit more ridiculous.
Yeah. I thought that because of it's fun. Like I enjoy magic stuff, and I haven't really done a wizard, I don't think. When we were playing the a short Midderlands game of For Coin and Blood, I had a wizard, but aside from that, I haven't really played them, and I do quite enjoy them. So I thought I would go for that now. And we have established, this is entirely like not in in connection to any of what we've talked about before, but a divergence is what we do on this show. Apparently, the character's bloodline, as told by NPCs, because of the random rolls that we did back in the day, NPCs have since sort of hinted that there's something in the bloodline that makes like there's a font of magic of some kind, or like a specific connection to perhaps the dark forces, and I figured but that is a thing we could try and explore as well.
Well, yeah, and as you say, part of the whole reason for wanting to change things up a bit is keep the game fun, get us to try something new, and I think so. Obviously, you have to rejig characters because we're getting into ICRPG, but if you're going to be rejigging the characters anyway, why not go? Oh yeah, I'll try something different. Oh, I fancy trying a bit of magic. I'll give it a go now. Because whatever sort of maybe slightly flimsy sort of justifications would come up for it in game, if it results in the players having fun, me having fun, and the game sort of going in interesting new directions, I'm all for it. Okay, so to get back to our list of things I need to do, so we've got create the list of factions, faction goals, measure the scale, like the tiers of the factions. I've got a few details written down about using faction scale for roles to determine clashes of factions and stuff like that. So, presumably I need to have a list of factions with the relationships.
Yeah, I would. One of the things that Scum Villainy does, it lists each faction's enemies and friends, which I don't know that you need to go into in extreme detail. Of course, if this is all me being not exactly sure how much work you want to do for each of these, I think you could be just fine with going by intuition whenever there's a question.
Well, my basic plan at the moment is just to keep things simple, so I've got them. Is effectively to put together a big sort of spreadsheet, effectively with the factions going across it in columns, with the details written below, because then I can put the relationships underneath.
Yeah.
Then potentially underneath that have a list of the different districts and have the heat/wanted ratings recorded in that. Which obviously would be another thing I'd need to record, the heat and the wanted ratings for.
I would suggest that that's one of the places where you could go with broad strokes as opposed to going into detail. I would maybe, and you know this, you have probably a better idea how to divide this up, but I would maybe say take Great London divide it in 4 quadrants and have each of them be a thing, or maybe even just use the Thames water, just north,
So north
south.
and south.
Yeah, I would maybe go for that, actually.
Yeah, I've been considering that, because although we could sort of do it by district, there are a lot of districts in Great London.
Like 50 or something.
Yeah, there's like a ridiculous amount of districts in there, which is obviously great for when you're running the game, and obviously they would still exist in character, because each area has its own sort of slightly different character. So you guys have spent a lot of time knocking around in Bishopsgate. That's where most of the churches and the temples are at. So it's like all the shops there are selling like candles and prayer books, and
incense,
stuff like that. There's always the sound of like church bells ringing in the background. It's got its own character. Whereas if you go to like Slaughterward, where like Big Mick came from, it's all like the sort of animal slaughtering. It's all
awful.
It's all sort of grimy, like the smell of meats everywhere. There's farming districts. There's obviously the goblin held district of the city, which was sort of like gifted to the goblins. So that has a slight sort of like weird sort of almost sort of a shanty town-esque sort of feel, where it's mainly goblins, but they've got these forges, because they're just like, safety regulations for forges. Throw them out the window. So there's
I'll just build my house next to this forge.
That's it. So there's always like explosions and like random stuff going on there. So obviously, I'm going to keep the districts for sort of in character purposes, because like, people know the districts. But I do agree, sort of dividing it up in a slightly chunkier manner. Whether like we get, like say, we just go north and south, or whether we go. What I might do is I might do the do north and south, but then there's like an area which is basically where like all the districts are themed around sort of like, this is where the royals and all the nobles live.
Yeah.
So perhaps I've like the southern side of the river, which tends to be the poorer districts, the northern side, which is the richer area, then maybe have like a noble quarter or something equivalent.
Yeah, that sounds good. Because it kind of divides it into, even if we are still in like deeply in the feudal system where it doesn't really break down like that, but you have the very top of society in one category, and then you have the sort of like everything coming down from the very top nobles, so like the lesser noble houses, the clergy, you have the guilds, the artisans and whatnot, and then you jump over the river and you're down to the sort of lower caste society, where it's the untouchables, it's all the dirtiest of work.
It's the people who like scour the riverbeds, or like looking for like bits of tap they can.
Yeah, basically scavengers, really.
Pretty much.
So you would have different brackets for like the worst to do, sort of like the bottom tier of society, and then you have the fairly broad mid tier, or like to be honest, like the top tier society, and then you have the rulers. And I think using those 3 as the categories in which heat accrues, I think that's probably pretty good, because then you can have the sort of situation where we have no business going into Bishopsgate, even though we live there, but like we get into trouble every time because the church hates us for some reason. But we can still be buddies with the nobles, who are like, oh, it is but we don't really dabble in the matters spiritual. That is for the church to determine. We're like, come on, dude! Like they're always up in our business, and they're like, sorry, like it's not our affair.
It's not our concern.
Yeah, like we don't mind you, but like it's the church. So
I like that. Yeah, I might go with that. Like say, like I've obviously we know that medieval society is not organised in this way, but you've got the lower class, the middle class, and the upper class, basically.
Yeah. It's feudalism is weird. And
I mean, obviously we're sort of drastically like simplifying it for game purposes. But we are just trying to come up with a system to generate content and give like a bit of a sort of flavour of like a changing city, rather than trying to do like an authentic recreation of like an actual medieval city, which Greater London is not even to start with.
Goblins.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just wanted to say that I really like the idea that like if we mess up enough in the northern portions of the city, so where the clergy and the sort of upper classes are.
Yeah.
And because the nobles are they're a small set of people, and
I mean,
they're
I'd see it very much as like in the sort of the lower class area, you've got like the sort of working trades, the slaughterhouses, like fabric dyers, stuff like that. In the sort of north of the river, you've got the slightly more sort of middle upper class sort of mercantile sort of stuff going on. You know, the crafts people, let's say the church, stuff like that, and then you've got the upper tier, which is like all the nobles obviously want to be as near to where like the royalty live as possible.
Yeah, the fenced area with their guards at the gate being like, you don't, not in those shoes, I'm afraid. But I really like the idea that the nobles can be there in their own like playpen, and then we have the northern bit, and if we mess up enough there, we have the southern bit to go and like lay down, like lay low in like, oh, we need to get out of the north side of Greater London. We need to go lay low. And I
was going to say, and that's something worth talking about actually, because obviously in Scum and Villainy, one of the ways you can like diminish your heat is effectively you lay low in a different area, giving people time to like forget about whatever you got up to. So it might be worth porting some version of that.
Yeah.
Because obviously, I don't want it to be a case of you guys go like, oh, we've got too much heat in like the noble portion. That's it. We can never go there again.
Yeah,
so that's a bit ridiculous.
That's done.
No one's going to hold like a grudge for like years and years if you do like one thing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have a look at the rules in Scum and Villainy actually.
Scum and Villainy handles it much like it does anything else. It's a roll you make, and depending on how well you succeed, you reduce greater numbers of heat elsewhere.
Clearing heat. Your crew can lay low in a different system. See page 186. Okay. So what it says in Scum and Villainy, for anyone who's listening, if you want to reduce your crew's heat and wanted level, you hide out in another system. Say what your character does to reduce crew heat while hiding and roll an appropriate action. If you're successful, you reduce heat in the system by 2. If you're wanted, you add segments to a wanted reduction clock. So obviously, if you're actually wanted, that takes a lot longer to
that's your face on posters, and that doesn't really go away that easily.
And the way it describes this is you add segments to the wanted reduction clock on the appropriate system sheet. According to the roll, 1 to 3, 1 segment, 4 to 5, 2, 6, 3. If you get a critical, it's 5. If the wanted reduction clock fills up, you reduce your wanted level by 1 and you clear the clock. So presumably, if you've got like a wanted level of 3, you have to go round that clock 3 times to get it down to 0.
Yep.
So I quite like that idea.
Yeah, and then it's just a matter of determining like how do we roll for that, because it's obviously Scum and Villainy, so it's you roll a bunch of d6s depending on like what action you're using.
I could see perhaps we've talked about setting sort of chances of the like difficulty classes, difficulty ratings for the relationship changing.
Yeah,
I could see doing something similar to that again, like you said earlier, perhaps with a charisma roll, or it might just even be a case of if we go with like the Scum and Villainy style, where you're like, oh yeah, we're wanted in the north of the river, so we're going to lie low south of the river, and we say, oh well, what are you doing to like get this wanted level down, and then perhaps I just say, all right, make a roll for it, and it's up to the players to determine which of their attributes.
Yeah, what are they doing?
Roll based on what they're doing.
Yeah,
because if you're just like, oh, I'm whispering in a few people's ear, I'm putting out some positive like PR about us. You might be like, oh yeah, you can make a charisma roll for that.
Or you're like, I'm just gonna like work for goodwill. Like I'm gonna show to people that I'm an asset to society. So you roll your constitution because you're doing the thing. You're hauling stuff. You're like carrying water for people, literally.
I'll tell you what we could do for that actually. Obviously in ICRPG, most of the rolls work by you make a roll, then you roll some form of damage or effort dice.
Yes.
So what we could do is, because in ICRPG you have like a number of hearts which represent your hit points. Each of them is worth 10 hit points. So perhaps instead of having a clock, we say, oh, if you've got a wanted rating of 1, you need to do enough effort to knock off those 10 hit points, and then that's that heart of wanted rating gone.
That's exactly what we're doing. So we are accruing hearts, wanted hearts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and or like heat, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'd have like heat hearts, and when you get to a certain amount, you get all the wanted hearts on there, and then obviously so if they sort of go left to right, when you start decreasing them, you go from right to left, sort of working them down.
Yeah, I quite like that. That's neat. So I suppose that we just need to determine how difficult it is to. Well, I suppose we know the heat heart would be your like 10 effort worth.
And I mean, we don't need to actually make the actual D20 difficulty class too difficult, because even if you make that roll, you then have to make the effort roll, and you've still got to like work down those hearts to get it lowered. So the fact it's going to take a long period of time, and bear in mind you're only going to be rolling at most at the end of each session. Yeah. So if you're like, oh, I've got 3 wanted hearts, and I've got all these heat hearts, it's going to take you a fair few sessions.
Yeah, a lot of time.
Yeah, and if you sort of say, oh well, you can only roll for like one of these things. If you're like wanted in like 2 different areas, you've got to prioritize which of those you want to do. Because we've only got 3 sort of distinct chunks. You've still got to have somewhere you can actually lie low in. So, if you're just like balling around the city and being like wanted everywhere, where are you going to lie low?
Yeah, you need to figure your stuff out if everyone hates you. I quite like that. So I suppose then the question in this, I have 2, and the first is, how many heat hearts does it take to make a wanted heart? Are we going with 3? For some reason, 3 it comes up.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we think most people with basic effort without any like modifiers or put any points, you're rolling like a D4 for effort.
Yeah, just working.
Yeah, so potentially, if you're just working, it's going to take you at least 2 or 3 rolls to get 1 heart knocked down. So I think having any more than 3 would make it like potentially a massive undertaking. You'd be like, all right, so we've got the next 10 sessions we're going to be doing this, and if we're lucky, we might have like knocked down the heat to a reasonable level. So I think any more than a few would make it more of an endeavour.
So I think we're scrapping wanted entirely, and we're just going with heat.
Yeah,
because it doesn't need to be.
Because don't get me wrong, I love this idea, but if we're going for heat hearts, we then need to work out how it's going to be reflected in terms of like action being taken against the characters.
Yeah, I was thinking we just have heat equal wanted levels now. So we basically scrapped the conceptual idea of heat, and we just call wanted, or we could just call it wanted. Well, that's fine.
Yeah,
but
let's just call it wanted, because heat.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense in that game. For a fantasy game, it doesn't make a great deal of sense.
Yeah. So if we just call it wanted, and we have those apply in the same exact manner that wanted levels apply in Scum Villainy. Okay. So that would mean that we probably scrap maybe like the 0 level entirely, because it's probably very easy for us to accrue at least 1 wanted heart. But that's not the end of the world, right? That's just what it is. So I quite like the idea that each heart is a wanted level. So we do have, especially if we all work towards it, we could manage it. We could knock out a heart, maybe even 2 if we're really lucky, in 1 downtime.
Yeah, if you say each player character can make a roll, which works nicely with the ICRPG, because of the systems that use this heart and this effort system for creating spells, building stuff like that. So you could then have a choice like, right, you've got effectively 1 downtime action at the end of each session.
Yeah.
Right, are you going to spend it building stuff, researching spells? Oh, but your wanted level's a bit high. Do you want to spend it like laying low to try and get that down?
Yeah. Yeah. And then I really like this. It's very neat and symmetrical, obviously. And I'm so new to ICRPG, it didn't really cross my mind. This is how we should definitely do this. So every heart is equal to 1 wanted level, and then we set up. Shall we say there's a maximum of hearts 4 per sort of area?
Yeah. We don't want it to be like an infinite amount. So you sort of like, oh shit, we've got 10 wanted hearts here, right? That's going to take the rest of our natural lives.
Yeah,
to like
we're never going back to the south.
Yeah, so set it as like a max 4.
Yeah, and then we build. Basically, I'm going to suggest if we have 0 wanted anywhere, we're just going to not roll for like the repercussions, because there's not. We've been nice, but then we build a D6 chart for wanted levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we will be able to determine, or rather you can just roll on that, or we can roll on that however we want to do that, but we roll on that in the after action bit of the game, and then we will have the results that we have in Scum Villainy. Yeah. And I would say that is, as it is in Scum Villainy, that is before you get to reduce it. So if you max out your thing as a result of like a really bad job, you will have to suffer the consequences of that before you get to reduce it.
Yeah, so like you say, if you've done something that's raised your wanted level, you have to make that roll before you can then say, oh, we're going to lay low to like reduce it. Yeah, that makes sense, because otherwise you could potentially just like do loads of shit and then go, right, we're all going to lay low and we'll just avoid the consequences.
Yeah,
which isn't really the point of it.
No.
Well, one other thing, because again, I love the idea of using hearts as like a wanted rating. In terms of like the wanted rating increasing, would we want the wanted rate? Because obviously in Scum and Villainy, there's like the discussion at the end where you get so much heat depending on how the job went, and there's various modifiers. Would we want to have it just in case like you work it out and straight away it says like, right, you've gained this many wanted hearts? Or do we want to have it so in the same way as you reduce it by effort, do we want to have it go up as like hit points?
Effort towards a heart?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you might say like, okay, yeah, we're technically should only count the full 10 hit points as like a heart. So you might be like, oh yeah, we've only got a wanted rating of 1 at the minute, but we're only like 2 points off having like a wanted rating of 2.
Yeah. So I guess that's the heat then.
Yeah.
That's the idea of heat.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So I suppose you would just then calculate the amount of effort that we put towards screwing ourselves up, like according to whatever happened in the mission.
So I think what you probably do is, because obviously for like effort, weapon damage, and magic, they use like D4, D6, D8. Perhaps you have it so you go, okay, if it's a minor sort of everything went okay, nothing too. Maybe you roll a D4, and that's how many hit points you get towards a wanted heart. If you made a few more waves, but it was nothing too terrible, maybe you roll a D6. If it was like a big thing, maybe you roll a D8 or a D12 or something like that. Then obviously you can have modifiers where you're like, oh, if you like interfered with someone of significance, you get like an extra like 3 hit points of effort added onto that dice roll.
Yeah,
so I would the same mechanic.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that there's not an option to not roll die. So I would say that the minimum is the basic effort. And then depending on how much you screwed up, like each instance of significant, I suppose, like exposure or screw up or whatever, increases the effort type by 1. So after every mission or session, we roll at least the basic effort. If we had a lot of exposure, we roll the weapon effort. So this is increasing die sizes really.
Yeah.
And then like if in addition to having a lot of exposure, we also torched the goddamn barge and people died on board. So we increase it again to the magic.
Yeah, so rather than adding sort of like discrete amounts of hit points, effectively just like if you've like done particularly egregious things, it just bumps the dice up a step.
Yeah.
And I suppose you could say as well, like if you, because obviously there's things that you can do in Scum and Villainy that like both raise and lower your heat, sort of when you're determining that in the downtime bit. I suppose you could say as well, like if you, there's certain other things you could do that could lower it back down again. So you sort of check your list, it moves up and down, and wherever you land, that's ice you roll to determine how much effort goes towards your wanted rating.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where you will have to like do an appraisal of like what happens, and maybe like just add on more dice as well. Like if something went really wrong, maybe we just roll 2 dice.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
I mean, you've got the whole thing as well where obviously they use like the ultimate damage dice, which is a D12. I suppose you could say like, oh, if you've done something particularly egregious, it sort of bumps. So say like you've got like D4, D6, and D8 for your normal ones, and then it's like, oh, if you've done something like, I don't know, like mass murder or like mass arson or something like that, it just bumps it up to a D12 like straight away.
Yeah, or you roll a D12 in addition to whatever else.
Normally you add on the ultimate dice, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. I like that idea. Yeah, I like that. There's I wonder if we want to qualify it or just like talk it through every time there's call for it, like play it by ear. When like if something went sufficiently wrong, we just add on the ultimate to whatever else happens.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm going to sort of get this written down before the next session.
Yeah.
And the idea would be very much like Scum and Villainy, to make it a discussion in like the last 10 sort of 15 minutes of the session. So rather than me just saying, oh, your wanted rating's gone up by 2, actually sort of say like, oh, well, yeah, you were fairly quiet on this mission, so that would be a D4. However, you did like kill one of the guild masters, so that bumps it up to D12.
Yeah.
Well, so it adds the D12 on. So
yeah, adds the D12.
So we're going to roll a D4 and a D12. Okay, so you've gained 10 effort towards your wanted rating, so that's another heart in your wanted rating.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, and it's nice because it's using like the flavour from Scum and Villainy, but it's still sort of mechanically it's the same as ICRPG.
Yeah, because you don't want to have like these different bits from different, like you want to have consistency to keep it tight and keep it in the same realm where ICRPG tries to be anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm liking this. I like that we managed to bring in heat back in, because basically what a heart is a 10 segment clock.
Yes,
so
basically, yeah. Because I mean that's one of the things that struck me when I was sort of first thinking, could use some of the Scum and Villainy thing, is effectively ICRPG already has the clock mechanic. It just approaches it in a slightly different way. So if you're doing a project, you're trying to make something in Scum and Villainy, you get your clock. Whenever you make your downtime roll, it ticks up. When you get it complete, you've done your project. When you're trying to make something in ICRPG, the GM says, oh, you're going to need like 1 heart of effort to make that level 1 spell or whatever it is. And you can roll once a week or whatever. And you know that you need to get 10 total effort to have completed that first level spell. So like you say, effectively it's a clock into itself.
Yep. Symmetry.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty much sorted then. I think it gives me a list of stuff to get working on for the next session.
Yep.
I shall look forward to doing that.
Yep, and I would suggest as a final note to help us, as well as anyone who might do something like this in the future, it makes all the sense in the world to set down these factions in a way that they are going to get in each other's way.
Yeah.
So you need to manufacture reasons for them to interact with each other, because that's the entire point of all this. So if you set the sewer people in the sewer and the knights in the castle, and never the two shall meet, that's a waste of everyone's time. Like that's for you to giggle over and nothing else really.
Well, as we said sort of at the start, the whole point of this is to generate content, but obviously conflict is a great content generator in RPGs. So as you're saying, if I go like, all right, the crown's ruling over everything, but like the crown as a faction has nothing to do with anything else. That faction may as well not exist.
Yeah, it's inconsequential to anything that goes on in the game. Yeah. Unless, in this example, the sewer guild, maybe they're a sewer guild. Maybe, John, you decided that they're actually some kind of a nefarious cult, and they've dug too deep in the sewers, and they found some old Goman ruins, and there's a demonic Goman effigy that they're worshipping, and they're doing all this bad business, and the crown somehow learns of it. Now the knights are coming down in the sewers. They're trying to find out what's going on with this sewer demon. Yeah. And that's good shit. That's what he wants.
Oh yeah, I'm making notes.
Yeah, no, that's the thing that I think is done brilliantly in Scum Villainy, because they do list the allies and the enemies for each of these, and then even if you don't get, like, you just get this very short blurb of each faction, but they do mention who these people don't like and who they do like. You have an idea of what kind of conflict you can generate with those. Just if there's a mention that the sewer guild, their enemy is the crown guard, you're like, what? What's that about? And you need to figure it out. And then
I mean, as you say, in the Scum and Villainy factions, because it like lists what their interest is and sort of like briefly what their deal is, you can then look at the other factions and say, so like, right, which factions aren't going to be down with this?
So, or who's going to be affected by if this happens? Then
and also you've got like allies as well. So like, if this faction gets in trouble, who can they go to and be like, oh, help us out? Excellent. Right, well, thank you very much for joining me and talking this out. It's been very productive, I think.
That was really fun.
That'll give me a lot to work on. And that concludes mine and Johannes' discussion about how we're planning to adapt the Scum and Villainy style of downtime for use in our Midderlands game. I hope you've enjoyed listening to these couple of episodes. If you have and you want to leave us a message, you can get in touch with us and leave a voicemail at the SpeakPipe website. There is a link in the description of this show, or you can send us an email. The address is rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. We really do appreciate your thoughts and the feedback. So until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and keep gaming.